Howdy folks, this is Gabriel Sines once again. We're picking up about halfway through the development chapter here. In the last video we finished right here at this on Piaget's stages of development. Just as a quick recap, remember that is a series of stages developed by a man named Piaget, here listed on this next slide, show how people develop a sense of logic and abstract reasoning as they grow older. The way these stages are tested is through a series of conservation tasks. You can see those on the videos. I really recommend you watch them. They're really cute, but they also show how well children understand the information presented to them. Conservation tasks are all about how the same material presented in a different form is not necessarily any different in quantity. So, critical periods are the times at which or by which you need to learn something for it to be learnable. Sorry, that's a little confusing. Let's try again. A critical period is a point in your development by which you need to learn something, or else you may have a lot of difficulty learning it, or you may not be able to learn it. So a good example for this is, imagine a person who's raised by wolves or by monkeys or some other animal species. These people do not have an opportunity to learn language, and after the age of, say, 5 or 10, it becomes incredibly difficult for them to learn language. That's because in our biological development, we have certain time periods during which we can learn certain things more easily. We all know that learning languages is easier at a younger age. However, learning any language at all must happen by a certain age, or else it's pretty much impossible for us to learn languages ever again. Another interesting fact is that there are periods in our early life during which the exposure to different languages can affect how we learn. So children at really young ages, less than a year, need to be exposed to multiple different languages because it becomes harder and harder for them to pick up on different accents if they've never been exposed to a variety of pronunciations, different sounds that their mouth can make. So, for example, if you only speak English and you are never exposed to another language like Chinese or French, then later on in life you may be unable to hear different sounds from different languages that do not exist in English. And so when you try to pronounce words that require those new sounds, you may be unable to notice them. In reality, what's going on is you can hear those sounds, but you're not used to paying attention to them, so you naturally ignore them as being not parts of speech. Okay, so let's talk about parenting and love. Here on this next slide, what I've got are a series of pictures, and as we're going through them, I'd like you to think about, do they show parenting? Do they show learning in the children? So here on this first one, we've got a couple kids playing, hitting each other on the sofa. Are those kids learning anything? Are they learning anything from the mom? Is she doing parenting by being annoyed and showing her annoyance by sitting down and putting her head in her hands? Next up, the kids in this story are getting a little bit rowdy, jumping up on the seat, shouting. Are they learning anything at this point? Is the mom doing any parenting at this point? Well, let me start by answering on the left side there. The kids are actually learning. You perform learning when you play. Say you learn to use your body better through the physicality of play. You may notice that children have kind of a wonky, stilted way of moving their bodies, and by playing physical games, they actually get better at moving. They become smoother at moving their bodies. At the same time, the mother is actually doing a type of parenting. So what's the thing is, the kids there are learning that when you get annoyed by something, the thing to do is to go over and sit down and, kind of just deal with the stress. Same thing happening in the next one. Again, the mom is showing the kids that when she's bothered by something, annoyed by something, the best response is to go sit down and just try to ignore it, unsuccessfully. Funnily enough, the kids will actually learn to not successfully ignore something that is stressing them. Weird. It's something that seems very subtle, but they are picking up on it. Another thing that the kids are doing in that second picture is that they are testing the boundaries of what they can do. If the mother tells them stop doing that, they'll learn that jumping on the couch and shouting is really annoying and bothersome to other people. They may pick up that it's bothersome to other people in this picture because the mom's clearly, annoyed, but they are also probably learning that they can get away with a lot, given the fact that they aren't being disciplined for their rowdy actions. Maybe they're learning that what they're doing is perfectly okay and not annoying at all. In this next picture, not sure why it's got better resolution here than the first one, but you see the parents arguing because the kids were fighting. So again, here the kids are learning that they can't dissuade their parents from fighting. They're learning that the parents' discussion happens in such and such a way. Interestingly, it's important for parents to show discussion and disagreement to their kids. Imagine you as a child are exposed to parents that never argue and never disagree. It may be that in the future you don't know how to argue or disagree with someone in an amicable way. So it's beneficial for parents to disagree in front of their kids so their kids learn how people can disagree in respectful ways. Another picture here, in this one, the daughter is showing what she's learned. The parents are arguing. She's bothered by the argument, so she goes over and sits down, and wouldn't you know it, she put her head in her hands. You can see that she's put the pillow under her arm, just like in the first picture. Kind of the conclusion of all the learning. And last picture, making sure to finish off happily. Looks like whatever was going on, everyone's all happy-dory, and they're probably going to go get ice cream now. It's good that the parents show the children that despite having an argument that might have been intense, it's the conclusion ends up being positive anyway. If you want to look at this negatively, it almost looks like the dad's decided he's going to take the daughter, and she's glad to finally be rid of those other two, and he's like, "See you later, y'all, haha." That's probably not what's going on. This is a stock image, so the story I made up is totally farcical, but it's important to know that pretty much at any time children are learning. Anytime they play, they are learning, and anytime you do anything as their parent, they are learning. So to really put this point home, play is beneficial. When children play, they learn a heck of a lot. I already talked about them learning physical things, how to maneuver their body better. You can imagine these kids who are playing out a pretend tea set scene are learning different things about, say, so gender roles. You notice the boys got blue plates and the girls have pink plates, so maybe they are being taught that boys are supposed to be different from girls and boys are supposed to like blue better than pink. They may also be learning abstract information. By pretending to play, by pretending to have dinner, they may be learning that, well, they can imagine food, so they can practice their imagination. It's possible, therefore, in the future, if you're trying to cook something, that your ability to imagine what that food is going to look like when you finish cooking comes from your experience in playing imaginary games. So children may learn to think abstractly by games of pretend or just games that require complex rules. They may learn how to interact with other people, how to be nice to folks, or how to not be nice. Another big one, children learn through risky play. So what is risky play? Risky play is anytime children are playing where they have a chance of hurting themselves or hurting someone else. Why is risky play important? Well, imagine a child that's sheltered, that they have never had an opportunity to accidentally hurt themselves or hurt someone else. When they grow up, they may feel invulnerable. They may feel as though they can't hurt themselves or they can't hurt someone else. If a child has the chance to hurt themselves when they're young, the hurt's probably not going to be too bad. It's probably not going to be much worse than a scraped knee, but they'll learn the lesson that they should be careful or else there are consequences to making silly decisions. To put these ideas into more concrete terms, children experience egocentrism, the idea that the world revolves around them and they have difficulty experiencing the world through the perspective of other people's minds. They have difficulty understanding that other people exist and that they have their own experiences and their own points of view. For example, this kid is showing her grandpa that the two cards match, and she's showing the two cards, but she's showing the two cards to herself. So even if she does have two fives on the other side of these playing cards, the granddaddy can only see the lines, so he can't tell whether the cards match or not. In this case, the kid is showing this egocentrism. She doesn't understand that the granddaddy can't see the same things that she is seeing. You may notice this in some of the Piaget videos from earlier. Over time, and through this sort of play, children might learn that other people have different minds. And so the theory of mind is the idea that other people have their own minds and their own perspectives, and children learn theory of mind as they develop. You start picking that up definitely kind of from 2 to 5 years of age. Definitely kind of. Really well said. Last point. Children with autism have trouble developing theory of mind. So autism is a set of characteristics that in large part reduce your ability to, or impair your ability to understand how other people are feeling. There's other aspects to autism, and we'll learn more about it in another chapter, but a big part of that inability to feel how other people are feeling, inability to have empathy or notice things in other people, is that it's hard for you to learn information about other people, and therefore hard for you to pick up theory of mind. Self-talk is another important aspect of development for children, but it's also an important aspect for development in adults. Self-talk is just how you talk to yourself, and it's a very important thing because it has so many beneficial uses. I remember when I was a kid, I went to PE one time, and the teacher told us that it was important for us to be able to do at least just one more jumping jack than the day we had done than the amount we'd done the day before. The amount that we did doesn't matter so much. What mattered was improvement. And I kind of said out loud, but to myself, yay, I did more. And she responds by telling me that I shouldn't talk to myself and that I was crazy for doing so. And she was pretty dang rude. It's really not something that you should say to an elementary schooler, but she got arrested shortly after, so I'm the real winner here. So self-talk can be beneficial. I've got listed here a couple of ways in which self-talk can be beneficial. For example, self-evaluations, telling yourself you did really well, is a very positive experience. And so if you don't have anyone to tell you how great you are or how successful you are, how competent, evaluating yourself adequately, giving yourself objectively accurate evaluations can be beneficial. Telling yourself that you really didn't do very well on something, also super great. You have to be careful about these evaluations, though. If you constantly evaluate yourself in ways that are unnecessarily negative, that's going to hurt you too. If you want to practice improving your self-esteem or your confidence, a great thing to do is to talk to yourself constantly and evaluate how well you did, and make sure you evaluate yourself reasonably well. People who are depressed can benefit from doing this. Folks who believe they can't do anything right can benefit from constantly evaluating everything they do. For example, you're definitely going to be good at going to the bathroom and closing the door and turning lights off and doing dishes, and so it's easy to evaluate yourself when you mess something up. But if you practice doing self-talk all the time, you'll notice that really you're perfectly fine and normal. Another aspect of self-talk is self-policing. So if you want to restrict yourself from something, say there's a cake on the table and you're trying to be on a diet, telling yourself, I don't want to eat that, will actually help you avoid eating that thing. It'll improve your resilience. So self-talk has lots and lots of different uses. Another one down here, explaining ideas and reasonings, is something we've talked about before. I like to say that the last stage of learning is teaching. And so if you can explain an idea, you'll prove to yourself that you know it. If you have an idea but you can't quite explain it, trying to explain it in words will make it clearer. If you have a decision you need to make and you're really not too sure how you should make the decision, talking it out with yourself, being your own devil's advocate, can be very beneficial. If you're trying to do something very complicated, reciting the instructions to you or saying what you're doing or what you're thinking as you're doing it will help it seem simpler and help you get through it. Okay, so the next thing we've got here is kind of an abstract idea that's it's pretty simple, but maybe a little bit difficult to grasp. The idea here is schemas. Schemas are the way in which we organize information. So you can have a schema for a restaurant and how you use it. For example, you go to McDonald's, go to the counter, ask for your food, pay for your food, wait, get your food, go eat it. So based on that schema, if you go to a sit-down restaurant like the Olive Garden, you may be confused as to how to use the restaurant until you kind of watch how other people do it. And once you understand how to use the Olive Garden, maybe your schema for what a restaurant is or how it works changes or adapts, or you create a new schema for the new information. An important part of schemas is that they're very beneficial in helping us understand how we see the world and what matters in our world. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead and watch the video here. It's about it's about how monkeys develop the idea of what a mother is. You'll notice there's a wire mother on the left, which provides through this nipple here some milk, and there is a cloth mother here on the right. And it's warm, it looks kind of like a monkey, and it provides comfort to the monkey. And so the question for this experiment was, what makes you a mother? What makes you a parent figure? Is it providing food, or is it providing comfort? So go ahead and give this a watch. The last section where the monkey is placed in a room full of toys is for a later part, so you don't need to pay too much attention to that just yet. I'll give you a moment to pause this video and watch that next one in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so hopefully you watched the video and the ideas of what a mother is made a lot of sense. You'll notice that they really cared about the cloth mother a lot more than the nutrient mother. And so it's interesting to note that our schema for what a parent is comes from the comfort provided by that parent, not so much the food and shelter. One thing I always mention in reference to this is I kind of a dislike for parents who who kind of treat their children like plants. I've always kind of had this idea that there are some parents that mostly what they do is they give their kids food and they give their kids shelter, but they don't really give their kids comfort and love. And so these plant parents may not be as good parents as they think they are, because what really constitutes a parent is the schema of comfort. Or, sorry, what really constitutes the schema of parents is the comfort that a parent provides. Okay, so let's talk about different attachment styles. Attachment styles are the ways in which a child can relate to their parent, and later on in life, the ways in which a person relates to other people, especially their closest relations. We've got two major attachment styles types, the first being secure attachment. Most children fall under the secure attachment category. The quality of a secure attachment is that they have a reasonably strong connection with their parent that they can be confident in. If you put a securely attached child into a room full of toys with their parent, they will be curious and explore the room full of toys. But if the parent leaves, they may be a little distressed and stop seeking out those new bits of information. Alternatively, the insecure attached children account for a fewer proportion of the children and also have a worsened connection to their parent. There are two types of insecure attachment, the first being anxious attachment. Children that are anxiously attached to their parent are overly connected. So if they are brought to a room full of toys with the parent, they will not explore the room and instead hang out with the parent and just kind of seek validation constantly. If the parent leaves the room and leaves the child in the room, they will be completely beside themselves, just wailing or be totally unable to do anything in the room on their own. The other type is the avoidantly attached. Sorry. Excuse me. The avoidantly attached children have no connection to the parent. So when they're taken to the room with the parent, they will seek out the toys. When the parent leaves, they won't care and continue to play with the toys. You may imagine that this is not so bad because they still seek out new things and are curious about their worlds, but it becomes a problem when we consider what these attachment styles look like as adults. So a adult with an avoidant attachment style will have difficulty making connections to people and and sharing themselves intimately with other folks and letting themselves be vulnerable. Of course, a person with an avoidant attachment style is not very healthy. And additionally, the anxious attachment style is just as bad. Someone with an anxious attachment style would be overly connected and dependent on whatever their relationships are. So you can imagine a lot of people's first relationships might look like this, or one of these two. An avoidant first relationship being someone who just can't really make a romantic emotional connection with someone. An anxious attachment being someone who is so attached to their romantic partner that when they're not with them, they feel constant anxiety. Of course, a secure attachment style in adulthood is the best. Someone who may feel a little bit anxious when they're not with their loved one, but definitely can go on with their lives. How do we get to these attachment styles? Well, the first secure attachment style is obtained through the responsive parenting, and to explain that, let's instead first talk about the other attachment style development caused by inconsistent parenting. So, what is the difference? Imagine that your child hands you a frog that they drew and cut out, and so they say, look, mommy, I made a frog. If you respond with, that's nice, dear, something that just kind of says, okay, acknowledges them, but really doesn't show them that you really care about their frog, that's inconsistent parenting. It can happen if you're really busy, but it can also happen if you just aren't too interested in your child. By saying, okay, that's nice, it seems as though you're paying attention to them, but you really aren't. The child learns that you're not particularly interested in what they have to say or what they're doing, and so they may develop an avoidant attachment style. You don't care about them, so why should they care about you? Or they may develop an anxious attachment style, where they seek out validation that they can't seem to quite get. Alternatively, a responsive parent will make a clear relationship, or a clear response that associates to the child. It demonstrates that you care. So say, oh, wow, you cut this out really, really well. I like how you colored it blue instead of green, or something that shows that you're actually paying attention to what they did. What might these attachment styles look like in adults? Well, I kind of already mentioned that, so instead, let's talk about fear of intimacy. So, an example of problems associated with anxious and or avoidant attachment styles. The first example here at the top left, a person with an fear of intimacy may have an inability to share their thoughts or ideas. Maybe they think that their ideas are always stupid. Maybe they think that they're not good at talking about their ideas. A person with an intimacy problem may also be unable to share their personal feelings or opinions. They may be unable to say that they're afraid or that they're in love with someone. People with intimacy problems, of course, may suffer from sexual relationship issues where they can't really connect with someone sexually or enjoy sexual activity. And the other side of that too, the person may not be able to really share experiences with another person. There's nothing wrong with seeking out experiences on your own and enjoying solitude, but it's important for humans, a social species, to interact with other people and enjoy experiences in a social way. If you'd like to learn more about this, feel free to check out this website, but this next video here and vocabulary term expands on this intimacy problem. Think about intimacy in terms of basic trust. Basic trust is the idea that the world and other people are reliable and trustworthy. So if you have basic trust, you may be able to explain your fears or your concerns or your distresses to another person. But if you lack basic trust, you may not be able to really show vulnerability. Basic trust problems can come up in a lot of different ways. Like you may not trust other people to keep a secret. You may not trust other people to be competent enough to listen to your problems and provide their own ideas for solutions. You may believe that you need to be perfect and therefore should not show vulnerability to other people. There are lots of ways that basic trust problems can come up, but I'd like you to go ahead and watch this video. It's short, and it does a great job of talking about trust issues or anxiety issues or relationship issues where you don't really want to connect with people as well as you might do. So go ahead and give that a watch. I'll give you 3 seconds so you can pause this video and come back. 3, 2, 1. It's a really lovely video, isn't it? I actually really enjoy the child narrator and the art style. Moving on, parenting styles. I've got 4 different parenting styles here for you. They're pretty simple, but they might be a little hard to remember, and I'll have a mnemonic to help you remember them in a moment. So, authoritarian parents here on the top left. These are parents that are overly strict with their kids, parents that have really high standards, maybe unrealistic standards, and that don't really see their kids as a person unless they meet those standards. Children with authoritarian parents may not really develop very good self-esteem. They may be overly critical to themselves if they ever make mistakes, and they may be constantly seeking validation from other people. On the other hand, permissive parents here are parents who are overly concerned with how their kids act and think and believe in themselves. So permissive parents just kind of let their kids do whatever they want. Permissive parents are parents of children that are constantly screaming at Walmart because those children know that they can get away with it and get their own way by throwing a fit. There's negligent parents, of course, those who don't really do anything with their children, those plant parents that let their kids just do whatever. Children of plant parents or negligent parents develop poor academic and social outcomes. Finally, authoritative parents, not to be confused with authoritarian, but authoritative parents have discipline for their kids, but they're also personally connected to them, and they care about how their kids feel. Authoritative parents are the best, the ideal version of parenting, and if you want to try and remember authoritarian versus authoritative, my example for this is to think of authoritative parents as being informative parents. So they both end with tive, authoritative, informative. The reason an authoritative parent is informative is because, well, the authoritative parent is always going to work with their kids on understanding the reasons behind why they should do different things. For example, if a child says, I don't want to go to my violin lesson, I don't understand why I need to have any extracurricular activities at all, the authoritative parent might inform their child that it's important for them to have a well-balanced education, or to have hobbies, or to have, say, just things about them that can develop them in different ways. It may be that the parent just wants the child to have an opportunity to have musical education, so that they can better enjoy music, so that they can make more friends, so that they have a livelihood in the future, but they wouldn't necessarily force them into it. If the kid doesn't want to do violin, maybe they can do another instrument or find an altogether different extracurricular activity. Authoritarian parents, you can remember them as being Targaryen parents. If you've ever watched Game of Thrones, the Targaryen family is one that's very not nice to their children, and as such, it's easy to remember that authoritarian parents are, or might be, Targaryen parents. Next up, I've got a simple little chart here that might help you understand how these different parenting styles work. So you can think of the parenting styles as being on 2 different scales. First, do the parents react to the child's feelings? And second, do the parents have rules or discipline? It's easy to know that the parents that don't care about their kids' feelings and don't really have any rules are negligent, right? They don't have much at all to do with their kids. But parents that have rules but don't care about parents that don't have rules but do care about their child's feelings may be permissive. So these are the parents that are so concerned about their child's feelings that they don't care about setting any discipline standard and will just let their kids do whatever they want. Next up, parents who don't care about their kids' feelings but do have rules and discipline are authoritarian, right? So they don't care if you don't want to do violin, you're going to do violin. Lastly, parents that care about their kids' feelings but also have discipline are authoritative. Of course, that's where you want to be. It's probably the ideal version of a parent. Next up, we're going to talk about Adolescence. Adolescence is an interesting and awkward period of life where so many changes happen. You start to grow, your body makes a lot of new and interesting hormones and physically changes over a period of really not that many years. You start to think in completely different ways and see people in new ways. When I think of adolescence, this GIF here is the first thing I think of. It's one of the background dancers from the hit YouTube sensation music video Friday, which was famous for being really bad. Unfortunately, the children, I guess adolescents in this video, were bullied a lot because of their participation in that music video. But this particular girl actually made something of herself, and I don't mean that these people were failures, I mean that she took that bullying and that short-term fame and turned it into something wonderful. She's actually a quite wonderful lady, and you can learn more about her here on this website. It's got a news story about how she took the fame from and bullying and turned it into a charity, which I think has to do with bullying, but I don't quite remember what it was for. Go ahead and click on the link if you find that interesting. She's one of those shining beacons of hope sort of folks that are really just always very positive. Next up, let's actually learn about adolescence. An interesting way to think about adolescence is in terms of the things that you develop over the period of adolescent age. When you're a teenager, you are constantly seeking sensations, so especially seeking out new sensations. What's it like to drink or smoke? What's it like to do extreme sports? What's it like to be friends with people I've never been friends with before? What's it like to have sex or romantic relationships? At the same time, adolescents haven't quite developed impulse control, the thing that makes you careful, the thing that tells you maybe it's a bad idea to jump from one table to another table just because my friends will think I'm cool. So it makes sense that adolescents might make mistakes, but it's great for adolescents to make mistakes. This is kind of the last bastion for them to play. Once you start hitting these older ages, 22, 25, 30, you stop being able to rebound from major mistakes, and the mistakes start having larger and larger impacts on your life. Jumping from a table as an adolescent may hurt you for weeks or a couple of months, but when you hit 30 or 40, jumping off a table might break a bone or destroy your legs. Sorry, that got a bit wild, but the point is that it makes sense that you need a last bastion here of trying a bunch of new things before you really start becoming a responsible person. When does adolescence start? The easy answer is it ranges from 13 to 19 because the words have teen in the name, but a better answer is that adolescence occurs whenever puberty happens. So for girls, it's a little bit younger. I believe 10 is kind of the average age of puberty onset for girls, but as early as 8 sometimes. For boys, a little bit older, so I believe the average age for boys is 12 or 13, maybe as early as 10, depending on your biology. There's a lot of different things that happen in your adolescence, and there's a lot of experiences that you get for the first time. You seek a lot of independence, and you start to see your relationships in different lights. I clearly remember being a teenager and having breakfast before school, and having my dad walk past me and say good morning before he went off to work, and I remember just hating him for saying good morning. And the thing is that there's nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong about him saying good morning to his son, but I hated him. I don't know why I hated him for that. I didn't dislike him as a person. Part of the things that happen in adolescence is that you start to be biologically pushed away from your parents. You think in weird ways through hormones, and you start to experience feelings that make you feel superbly unique and individual. It's important for adolescents to feel unique and special because adolescence is really the time period where you can start making major decisions and strides towards long-term life goals. But it's also important for adolescents to develop an ability to converse with their parents. A lot of times teenagers will feel as though whatever they're feeling is something that their parent has never felt before, when in actuality the parent has definitely felt it before, or maybe has felt it so many times that they don't even notice it, or maybe don't even remember feeling it for the first time. let's talk about the stages of moral development. It's interesting to talk about these for adolescence because adolescence is when you start to develop some of the highest order forms of moral development. Let's start off by explaining what each one of these stages are. They kind of go from the bottom up in terms of being least to most moral. What do I mean? Well, we're going to use each one of these. We're going to explain each one of these in terms of an example. Why should you or should you not break a cookie jar and eat some cookies? So at the bottom, the lowest stage, avoiding punishment. I shouldn't break the cookie jar because I'll get in trouble if I do. So in this case, you're avoiding having to stand in the corner because you broke the cookie jar. The second stage, self-interest. I shouldn't break the cookie jar for any reason, just anything that benefits you personally. The next up, good boy attitude. I shouldn't break the cookie jar because my mother will be mad at me. And this really could be good boy or good girl. The idea of the good boy attitude is that your morality depends on whether people like you or not. Law and order morality. I shouldn't break the cookie jar because eating cookies now and breaking the jar is against the rules. Social contract. I shouldn't break the cookie jar because we all share the cookie jar and breaking the cookie jar would be selfish. Finally, principle. I shouldn't break the cookie jar because breaking the cookie jar is a bad thing to do. It's not a good thing to do on principle. The reason these systems of moral development are interesting, especially to me, is because it's a lot of fun to look and think about the people in your life and wonder what stage of moral development are they at. And the thing is, you don't necessarily sit and stay at one stage. You probably have use of one stage more so than the others. But so as an example, I really enjoy looking down on one of my old advisors who would constantly be worried about doing things based entirely on whether they were against the rules. For example, one day she told me that we needed to do something in order to maintain confidentiality for students. But in reality, what she was doing had nothing to do with confidentiality. It wouldn't affect the students' confidentiality at all, and in fact might actually put them in greater danger of confidentiality. In reality, what she was doing was trying to follow the rules to the letter of the law, when instead following the spirit of the law but breaking the rules would have been more beneficial. In that case, the idea of following the spirit of the law would be this highest moral development stage principle, whereas the letter of the law is down here at the law and order morality. Of course, if you just want to avoid punishment, there's a lot of people that do things just so they don't get in trouble. It's lots of fun to look down on those sorts of folks from your high horse, and if you feel as though you may not be at the highest stage of morality, don't worry, nobody is always at the highest stage of morality. Personally, I don't really, sometimes I will, let's see, what is something bad that I do? I have no interest in choosing my restaurant based off of whether the restaurant has sustainable farming policies. Because, to be totally honest, the only thing I care about a restaurant is whether or not it tastes good and whether or not it kills me. If it tastes good and it doesn't kill me, I'm going to go to that restaurant. I don't care if they have environmentally friendly practices. In that case, I am definitely in that self-interest morality stage, and nowhere near any of these guys up here. I wonder if there's a way to choose your restaurant based off of how illegal it is. No, I have definitely eaten illegal street tacos before. Yeah, so I'm down here on the self-interest stage. Okay, moving on. You can think about these stages in terms of three groups. The middle stage here is the conventional stage because this is the stage during that kind of society is supposed to follow. So our laws and being liked by other people is kind of the basis of civilization. The pre-conventional stage is really something that children do or that lower quality of people in society do. So if you can imagine, people in jail may live their lives based entirely off of how they benefit or how they can avoid punishment in jail. I don't want to say that everyone in jail has low versions of morality, but in situations where you really don't have very many options and you're dealing with a lot of hardship, these lower moral stages might become much more prominent. The post-conventional stage is named so because it does involve breaking rules in order to be good. You can protest against certain laws or break those laws to boycott them because you believe that they are unfair or racist or sexist or whatever principle you're trying to follow. You can think of these stages or groups of moral development as being status quo, civilization for conventional, self-interest, I guess that's kind of repetitive, but I think it makes a lot of sense, and universality. So what is good versus what should I do? Here's another slide here about, I've got another slide here about the different stages of moral development. They kind of get explained in a little bit more detail if you didn't like the one I was talking about, and there's a nice little podcast here that might help you remember all the different stages. You are not required to remember all these stages. However, I do want to make sure that you're aware of them. That's definitely true with all of the different stages or types or stage groups that we'll be talking about in this chapter. And I do want to make one more thing aware for you. We have several activities in this class, and one of the activities that I've set up that might be fun for you to do is a group activity that you can do on your own. It's taking one of the moral development stages or the reflexes or the milestones for babies or some of the other stage things that we'll learn here in a bit, and making a video about it, explaining the stages, but also providing examples that people can watch. I can very clearly imagine situations where you could make some pretty funny examples for these if you want to act them out or find a children's book or something. I really encourage you to do that activity because I kind of want to see what videos folks come up with and what interesting examples folks come up with. If you do a great job, I might make your video a part of the class. Okay. Let's talk about, no phone. Let's talk about delayed gratification. Delayed gratification is the idea that a person is willing to restrain themselves or put effort towards something without immediately being rewarded for it. So in this link here, or set of links here, I've got a couple of videos from the marshmallow experiment, which is a wonderful delayed gratification experiment. The way it works is that children are required to sit in a room with a marshmallow for 10 minutes, and if they don't eat the marshmallow after 10 minutes, they'll get 2 marshmallows. So a very clear example of delayed gratification. If you want to think about delayed gratification in your own life, think about exercise or eating right? It's so easy to it's very hard to exercise or eat right because the gratification you get from it happens over a slow, longer period of time. Holding down a job has a wonderful delayed gratification because you may only be paid every week, every other week, or maybe only once a month. Go ahead and watch the video here, and I'll be back to you in 3 seconds. Make sure you pause it. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so having watched that video, I hope your cuteness levels have totally been filled. The marshmallow experiment is an interesting one because there's evidence that children who are able to pass the marshmallow test are more responsible later on in life. They do better in school and they have better health as adults. So maybe try the marshmallow experiment on your own. By the way, it's important for you to know that restraint is not all about being strong. We talked about that earlier, but also you can practice restraint. You can practice delayed gratification, and the more you do it, the easier it'll get. Next up, let's talk about the stages of psychosocial development. This is another series of stages or milestones that people hit over the course of their lives. In these cases, these stages are all about how well people relate to other people, so social development, and how they think about other people, psychosocial development. So this set of stages is probably best described by reading the little blurbs here on the right. Let's start off with an infant. So infants develop or need to develop an idea of trust versus mistrust. Kind of like that basic trust that we were talking about before. So as long as a baby has their needs met consistently, they will develop a sense of basic trust. Let's skip forward to 3 to 5 years of age. Children need to learn to have initiative versus guilt. So preschoolers learn to initiate tasks and carry out plans on their own. That's initiative. Think about a worker. If you've ever worked an entry-level job like at a restaurant or a fast food restaurant, some people will kind of laze about and not really accomplish very much on their own unless you tell them to do something. They may not have ever achieved the learning of initiative to go ahead and just take care of things on their own and figure out what they could be doing at any given moment. Another aspect of this is the feeling of guilt associated with not being independent. So if you do not have the initiative to do your responsibilities, you should learn to have guilt, not really about not being your own person. Skipping forward, let's go to 40. Let's do 21 to 39. Right, so this is kind of where most people in this class are probably going to be, maybe a little bit earlier than this, so maybe you're going into this. Young adults struggle to form close relationships and to gain capacity for intimate love, or they feel socially isolated. So as you are moving on in the next couple of years, consider how well you're able to form a close romantic relationship with someone and be able to well, it doesn't have to be romantic, it just has to be intimate. Are you able to share your vulnerability with other people, or are you constantly trying to seem untouchable and imperfect? Are you afraid of crying? Crying with other people, especially? Or do you feel as though you're safe to tell folks just how bad you feel sometimes? And trust me, everyone benefits from crying here and there. Everyone benefits from being vulnerable with their friends, family, and loved ones. So I really would encourage you to try and make sure you hit this goal. You can imagine kind of the idea of the psychosocial development stages. You don't have to know all of them, but I would really encourage you to read through this and just be aware of them, so that it helps. A lot of these help put a name on something that is pretty obvious that you should learn, but maybe hadn't really been concretely aware of. I've got here another version of the same chart that describes these development stages in terms of virtues. Feel free to read this and think about how it lines up for you. Okay, so parenting in adolescence. How do you parent your annoying teen child? Parenting teenagers is always kind of rough, and unless you get lucky and somehow manage to have a perfectly smooth child that never has any sort of trouble or relationship problems and always does everything that they're supposed to do, fun fact, that is impossible. Parenting is in essence a series of obstacles that you overcome through love, compassion, patience, and conversation. So let's see what we can work with. We know that teens are hypersensitive to rewards, so that means that they have a tendency to seek out sensations like sweet things. They might want to drink soda all the time, and they might want to hang out with their friends all the time, and they might make stupid decisions just because it's exciting all the time. So how do we turn this from a potential problem into a potential benefit? Well, because we know that teenagers and adolescents love new sensations, provide ample opportunities for new experiences. Try to go to museums with your teenager. Try to go to concerts with your teenager. Try to get them connected with interesting people. Make sure that they meet people that aren't just children, but folks of older and younger ages. You'd be surprised how much a person can learn and benefit from taking care of kids. You'd be surprised how much a person can benefit from interacting and conversing with older people that treat them like adults. Teenagers are new to a certain lifelong problem. Their identity. How do they identify who they are? So they may experience problems with questions like, who am I and where do I belong? And they may have trouble being okay with who they are naturally. They may feel that they are loved or maybe not loved. They may seek out confirmation of their validity from just about anywhere they can get it, be that boyfriend or girlfriend or friendships with people and family, and I promise you that if you don't give them that confirmation of love and value that they are so desiring, that they'll seek that out from someone, from somewhere. And if they're looking for that validation in places that it's not very good, or from people that aren't very good for them, they might develop problems. So how do we work with this? Make sure to avoid condemning your teenager. They're going to do things that you don't agree with, and that's okay. As long as they're not hurting themselves or someone else, make sure that they feel that their choices are acceptable. Reinforce unconditional forms of acceptance and love. Make sure you know that regardless of how successful or unsuccessful they are at anything, they will always be loved. And make sure you talk about clear boundaries and non-boundaries. Make sure they know what is okay to do and what you don't feel is okay. And if they disagree with that, have a conversation about it. Be willing to listen to what they have to say. And if you can't quite reach a middle ground agreement, try to make a compromise. It's important for teenagers to feel they can talk to you, because you're, as a parent, going to be probably the first person, their first route towards positive conversation. Teenagers desire independence, right? So they're going to start to need to feel they have value, but also need to have personal choice and volition. They might want to be able to set their own schedule, choose the classes they take, choose the friends they have. They might want to start driving as soon as possible, or riding their bike, or riding their skateboard to school, even though you think it might be dangerous for them to be out alone. So how do we work with these things when the whole point of this situation is that they're probably going to be wanting to separate themselves from you? Encourage your teenagers to seek out and obtain progressively more autonomy. If they want to be able to drive, make sure that they've earned it. Make sure that they drive responsibly. If they want to set their own hours, make sure they understand that it's perfectly fine for you to do an all-nighter, as long as you manage to go to class and do your homework or do well at your job. You can do pretty much anything you want as long as you accomplish your responsibilities, and make sure they understand that. Make sure to establish rules and expectations based on reasoning and discussion. So we kind of already talked about that. Another version of that too is to encourage teenagers to do the same, right? So a lot of times teenagers might not think about what they're doing, and so if you have conversations with them, it would be so cool for the teenager to feel responsible by setting up rules for themselves. We as adults and people have rules for ourselves, like we try to do work until 7 p.m. and then make sure to have a period of rest after 7, because both of those are important. Maybe help your adolescent start establishing personal rules for their own success. Okay, adulthood. At what stage in life do you become an adult? I always say that you're an adult the first time you set up your own dentist appointment. I've got a dentist appointment tomorrow, and I need to talk to my insurance agent just to make sure that I'm covered for a routine cleaning. And I'm kind of shirked on my adulting because I haven't worked on that. But what are other symptoms of being an adult? Another symptom I've heard of recently is the first time that you notice that you feel better after pooping. You lose your headache goes away after you poop, or you lose your bowel pain after pooping. That's a pretty good sign of being an adult. Another sign of being an adult is maybe noticing that you need to be more responsible about people, or about yourself, or about your long-term goals. Choosing to not eat the marshmallow. So even little kids can be kind of an adult as long as they work on that delayed gratification. When you become an adult is a very, very difficult question to answer, but we can talk about something that might start your adulthood, especially for newer adults, the idea of emerging adulthood. Emerging adulthood is a newer concept that's coming up more and more as time goes on. Emerging adulthood is the idea that young adults become fully fledged adult later and later in their lives as time goes on. So historically, people would become, if you want to think of becoming an adult as whenever you get married, historically people would get married in their early 20s, but now on average people are getting married in their late 20s. And so you can see that there is a longer period of time during which people before which people become an adult. Another way to measure becoming an adult is the onset of adolescence through women's first period, and men have something similar with their first ejaculation. If you want to say that that's the beginning of adolescence for males. So you can see that there's definitely a longer time interval between adolescence and adulthood as measured by your first period and being married. What is emerging adulthood and why does it come about? Well, first of all, people are developing faster, so they get through puberty and start puberty earlier. Another thing is that, and the reason they're developing faster is because better quality of life and better nutrition. Another thing is that, well, you might become an adult when you move out or when you get your first job, and thanks to the way things are going, people are moving out later and later in life. Economically, it's a bad idea to move out now because the housing market is so expensive and rent is just crazy. It might, additionally, you may not obtain your first job until pretty late in life just because your parents have given you the opportunity to go to college and you can just focus on that instead of having a job. People who feel as though their children have not grown up enough by the time they hit 20 or 25 may not be considering the fact that just the idea of adulthood and the age of onset of adulthood is changing drastically for lots of different reasons. If you feel as though you haven't quite hit the milestones that you want for adulthood, consider that you may be in emerging adulthood. If anyone ever asks you, when are you going to move out? When are you going to get your own place? When are you going to get married? When are you going to have kids? When are you going to, get a real job? If the answer, as I say again, is always none of your business. Unless they're a personal close friend and they're worried about you, and then you can have an intimate conversation about that. Moving on, let's talk about peaks. So peaks is something that young adults probably aren't going to deal with. Really, older adults are going to be worried about peaks. Peaks are the places or the times, the ages at which you hit your your highest level of ability in different things. When we talk about cognitive peaks, mental peaks, the two qualities that we usually think about are crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence. Most people will hit their physical peak around 20 to 30 years of age. Most people will hit their intelligence peak around 20 to 30 years of age. But as you can see from this graph, the two types of intelligence kind of peak in different ways. So fluid intelligence is what peaks in your 20s and 30s. Fluid intelligence is the idea that, or the type of intelligence associated with active thinking, understanding new ideas, solving problems, noticing patterns. Crystallized intelligence is really just what you know and how you understand things in the world around you. It's important that you have both of these for proper mental functioning, but it makes sense that older adults have more crystallized intelligence because they just know more things, and you may need less fluid intelligence because you already understand stuff, so you don't need to learn as often. This slide here does a great job of breaking down fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence for you, so feel free to pause here if you like. I've just explained what they are, so I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. This slide has some research data associated with crystallized and fluid intelligence. It kind of shows the same graph that we saw before, with the crystallized intelligence kind of hitting a peak, but balancing out pretty much throughout the rest of your life, whereas fluid intelligence hits an earlier peak but slowly goes down over the course of your life. An interesting aspect of how we measure these is the speed at which we can deal with problems. So the speed at which people respond to questions peaks at around this 25 years of age point. And what's interesting about this is that it peaks as a combination of the fluid intelligence peak and the crystallized intelligence peak. So on the left here, the y-axis is test scores. People with higher test scores have higher crystallized intelligence and also have higher fluid intelligence, but it's not as important. But over time, part of the reason people lose their fluid intelligence is not because they stop knowing things, but because they get slower at responding to things. So you can imagine that fluid intelligence has more to do with the speed at which you work with information, not so much how well you can work with that information. Okay, gains versus losses. Another topic for older adulthood is the idea of gains versus losses. What is gains versus losses? Well, it's what you're focused on. People who are focused on gains are focused on achieving new things, learning new things, obtaining new things, getting more money, hitting more milestones, being able to drive better, have the best looking house. Losses is the other side of that. So these are folks who are focused on losses are more interested on avoiding losing things, such as their independence, avoiding losing their certain abilities. You can imagine that older adults are more focused on losses because they're more focused on making sure that they can still walk around and use the bathroom on their own. They're more focused on making sure that they can still keep up with society and still have friends, make sure that they're still independent and they don't lose the right to drive their car. The choice of being focused on gains and losses is a choice. It's not something that you have to do. You naturally fall into being more losses focused as you grow older, but I promise that staying goals focused and gains focused is going to be more beneficial. In old age, you may be focused on not losing your driver's license, but if instead you choose to learn a new language and focus on the goal or gain of becoming fluent in Spanish, your brain will actually stay healthier longer, because learning new things and seeking out goals and gains is much, much better for your brain than trying to avoid losing certain things. Another example of this is that, yes, older adults have worse memories than younger adults, but the differences in memory has more to do with speed than competence. And older adults who seem to have really bad memories may also be experiencing a double-edged sword. Not only do they feel that they have worse memories because they're growing older, but the feeling that they have worse memories prevents them from double-edged sword is really the wrong thing there, but sorry, going back to what I was saying, feeling that your memory is getting worse because you're getting older can impair your memory because you don't try as hard to remember things. You naturally rely on using lists more often, and you avoid memory tricks because you think that you won't be able to remember things. Younger people use memory tricks more often, then they practice remembering things more often, so their memory is on average going to be better. The fact that you're growing older makes you afraid you'll lose your memory, but being afraid you'll lose your memory also makes you worse at memory. Okay, one of the last things to talk about here is subjective age. Subjective age is how old you feel, and it's a wonderful measurement because the younger you feel, the longer you'll live, the better you'll live. Older people tend to feel younger than they actually are, and the younger you feel, like I said, the longer you'll live. It is actually associated to mortality. A couple interesting things about this. Having grandchildren makes you feel younger, but having children makes you feel older. And of course, making you feel older is really not so great. Another interesting thing about this is that for young adults, subjective age works a little bit differently. Young adults and children generally feel that they are older than they actually are, and that's because there is some sort of cognitive peak. The ideal age might be somewhere between 20 to 30 because that's where you're at your bestest ever. So that's why younger people want to be older and older people want to be younger. How do you maintain a healthy mind? There are lots of different options for you. Of course, exercise and eating right is always going to be the most consistently beneficial thing to do, not just for your body, but for your mind as well. Your body cannot support a healthy, functioning mind if you don't exercise and eat right. Staying employed is a big factor in keeping a competent, well-working brain, because being employed gives you a sense of duty, a sense of responsibility, and requires that you constantly use your brain instead of fall into disuse through unemployment, through constantly seeking out entertainment because you're bored. There are brain training games that advertise helping people stay smart or get smarter and be smart throughout their older age, but the weird thing is that these brain games are actually not very beneficial. You get better at the game, not improve. You don't actually improve your brain. If you want a suggestion for how to improve how your brain works and keep your brain's competence throughout life, the best answer is always learn a new language, or really just learn to do anything new. But learning a new language is wonderful because it activates just about every part of your brain and it forces you to think in ways that you've never thought before, and it's just kind of fun when you have the time for it. Okay. Parenting and grandparenting, I've already kind of mentioned this, so I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but to reiterate, being a parent makes you feel older. There's a lot of responsibilities that come with being a parent, and becoming a parent is a very clear milestone that indicates your age. But there are also a number of social and cognitive benefits to being a parent. Your body will produce hormones that will make you love your kid, but also be more responsible for your kid. It's a lot easier to be responsible for someone else, and especially if someone is dependent on you. Being a grandparent makes you feel younger because a lot of the cognitive benefits associated to having children are still there, but you have fewer drawbacks because you're definitely more confident in yourself as a parent because you've already been a parent, and you're also not the direct parent, so even if things go poorly, you may not experience as much risk. I guess that's a dark way of putting it. Another thing about it is that you don't have direct responsibility for the child, so there's a little bit less of an emotional inkling there. Not sure if I'm explaining that right, but hopefully it makes sense. Okay. Let's talk about ageism. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think it's a very obvious issue, but that's one that really, as long as you are aware of it, it starts making a lot more sense. Ageism is the issue that people are prejudiced against or discriminated against based on their age. There's a lot of things that happens due to ageism. For example, older adults are prone to receiving fewer medical diagnoses because doctors look at them and they go, well, you're just old, and that's why you're feeling such and such pain, that's why you have lost such and such mobility and such muscle. Ageism causes older adults to believe that their memory is always going to be slipping. That causes adults to be believed less often in court cases and in personal situations. And being the victim of ageism has lowered life expectancy. If your doctor doesn't believe you and if your doctor doesn't take you seriously, of course you're going to die sooner, but if just people don't like you and trust you as an adult that's competent, of course you're going to feel isolated and sad, and which may lead to reduced quality of life and reduced life itself. The last thing I have here for you is a video on chronoperception, or the perception of time. The quick and dirty here is, I love when people ask, why does it feel as though time speeds up as we grow older? This video is all about that, but my answer is that as we grow older, we learn far less. Learning slows time down. Doing new things requires us to pay more attention and concentrate harder. And the harder we work, the harder we learn, the slower time goes. So, as we get older, we know more things. Fewer things are new. Imagine how many times you've had a conversation with someone and realized that, oh gosh, it's already been 3 hours, where did the time go? Talking is something that you know really, really well, and you don't notice time passing as you're talking because, well, talking is something you do automatically. Listening is something you do automatically, and so you're doing a bunch of automatic stuff. By the time that you realize time has passed, it's been quite a while. Same thing with driving. Have you ever been driving and realized that you don't remember getting yourself to where you are? Well, what's going on there is that driving is a very dang automatic thing. Now think about learning to drive, or talking to someone for the first time, or talking in a language that you've never spoken before, learning the new language. All of those situations require a lot of concentration. And talking in a new language may feel like it lasts forever and is really, really hard, slowing your perception of time down. Remember that our lives and what we experience isn't actually what's going on. I've already shown you many, many times that our experiences are very limited by our consciousness. So, in reality, our experiences are our memories. Our lives are our memories. And so, when you learn something, you create new memories. When you do things that you've done many times before, you're not creating a new memory. You don't need to remember the 1000th time you've gone to the bathroom. And so, as you grow older, fewer and fewer things are new and original and novel, and fewer things require concentration because fewer and fewer things are creating new memories, and so time speeds up. This video here will present I think the same sets of ideas, but with interesting visuals and slightly different conversation. Go ahead and watch the video if you are interested. I love this guy. He does a really, really great job, and it's kind of scary to me that in his newer videos he's starting to have some white hairs, because I always thought of him as like a cool 20-something. But that's the end of the material for this chapter. As always, we have a number of extra bits of materials. Feel free to watch the videos linked here and check out some of these websites. But make sure you do your vocabulary at the end of this week. We got a lot of it, but a lot of these may not be things that you're aware of before you started, but most of them I think are pretty easy to remember. Do you remember what epigenetics is? What about a insecure attachment style? Go ahead and do your vocabulary. Do your best, and I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day.